I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Hannah Roux, who's here from Sheffield University, where she's currently based. She's an architect, a theorist, an educator, and has also curated exhibitions, and her career before the University of Sheffield was that of being a visiting professor at the University of the Witwatersrand, being a guest professor in ETH Zurich, and her research, she was also selected as a Mellon Research Fellow at the Canadian Centre of Architecture. Her current research projects are looking, on the one hand, on post-extractivist livability, on mine lives, on landscapes that have been formed by mining in different contexts, in the South African context, in the British context. Another research project she's currently working on is called Sectioning, and it relates to the mediation between technical knowledge on the one hand and colonialism in architectural practice. And I think that's one of your long-term interests, also really looking at the colonial networks and how they've impacted architectural practice and the way building and construction in sub-Saharan Africa has evolved. Her talk will revert back to some of our Bauhaus protagonists and how they contributed to shape material preferences and knowledges in the 20th century. And it will focus on one particularly toxic material, and I look forward to your discussion how asbestos has been so powerfully put forward as a material, despite of all the deep problems that are related to it. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you very much, Elke, for convening this panel, and I feel quite regretful to bring you back to history after this kind of engagement with the present. So here, is that okay? Can I just click on this as well? Okay. Here are two demonstrations of modernist architecture's material thinness. On the left, an isometric from an architect's journal explains the placement of asbestos cement cladding on a facade. On the right, a disembodied black worker pulls asbestos fibrils from the ore body in a South African quarry. These two images connect three elements in an assemblage: thin things, architectural aesthetics, and risk. The last, specifically to those who work with materials with allergic, respiratory, carcinogenic, neurotoxic, reproductive, immunological, and genetic effects. Both demonstrations are also the product of the building we were in earlier today, making it two part of the assemblage the session is named for, and for which we've been asked to critically address. The Bauhaus is built out of thin and thinned materials. It serves as a demonstration of the aesthetic capacity of architects to effect reduction and stiffening in the context of material scarcity and growth after the First World War, so urban growth, to make more with less material. But as we are shown, thin materials crack. The slow decomposition of the Bauhaus buildings includes that of asbestos cement. One of the materials specified, for instance, in Marcel Breuil's Bambos houses and in the Bernal School. Material thinness can carry risk at either or both ends of its lifespan. Extraction alone makes a mess, but it is the ways that its demonstration projects are conceived as something aesthetic as well as materially experimental, so multiplying their influence and offsetting their faults. That makes them exceptionally risky. This is especially true in the context of the Bauhaus's relationship with building material producers, including the asbestos cement cartel of 1927, in which Etenit was the dominant European partner. So in this timeline, I show the parallel and relational ways in which these three elements, thinness, architecture, and risk, co-developed in asbestos cement's mobility. Along the top is the invention of it, amongst other thin materials, to replace finite, cheap reserves of stone, wood, metal, and clay. The band below them traces the experiments developed in the Bauhaus and its diaspora, the prefabricated technologies particularly. It tracks the period of Gropius's move to Harvard and the development of new products by his students there. And at the base, the long fight of public health experts to have asbestos banned reflects the slow recognition of risk by its specifiers. Asbestos cement is what we might call today the building product equivalent of an ultra-processed food. Powdered, mixed, rolled, spun, baked, and laced with additives. The great benefit that asbestos brought to building products in the 20th century was the creation of fireproof, brittle, and thin sheets from a slurry of Portland cement and a 5 to 10% mix of fibers. The strength of the sheets was enhanced by them being formed, whether as tubes or corrugated or ribbed. So in parallel, at the Bauhaus, the experiments of Joseph Alba's students in the forecourse, as they stiffened paper through cuts, bends, and folds, would explore how thinned materials could gain aesthetic value. Co-joining these industrial and studio experiments was the life work of the architect and editor Florian Adler, son of Bruno Maria Adler, a lecturer in art history at the Bauhaus in Weimar. As a young graduate, through some other family connections, Adler was appointed to the publicity office of Etenit in Switzerland. There, Adler Jr. created a journal through which the industry could market the unprepossessing grey material to discerning architects. In its first issue, AC, the International Asbestos Cement Review, the leading critic Siegfried Gideon endorsed the journal, citing Gropius's calls for architecture to collaborate with industry. As a reward, Gideon's chalet at Hinterstein was clad in discounted asbestos cement planks and glassol panels, following sketches by his friend Le Corbusier and working drawings by Edward Neuenschwander, along with the advice of Konrad Wachsmann and his students at Harvard, and Gideon's son-in-law, Oliver Keating Clay. Just a second. The singular and less than convincing building may have ended the elevation of asbestos cement to high design, but Gropius took his own unrealized admissions of prefabrication at scale to Harvard, where one of his students, Alvaro Ortego, a Colombian architect who attended Harvard in 1950, was inspired to use the material for mass housing. Sponsored by an asbestos cement company in Mexico, while also working as an advisor on technical assistance for the United Nations missions, Ortega designed a ribbed asbestos cement sheeting profile that would fit into grid modules and remove the need for intermediate supports in roof spans of up to 6 meters. So aligning the development of his product, called Canolit, Canoletto, Panelit, and so on, with a study of modular coordination, he aspired to use the United Nations as an agent by embedding asbestos cement products into their support manuals. So in an elaboration of his kit of parts scenario, this ISCMO house, type for the United Nations. Walls and roofs alike would remain thin, aligning to grid lines. So in this design, thinness aligns with systemic planning, that is detached from place or materials, but neatly ties into manufacturing logics and demand analysis. So as with other grand schemes of this period, the entire assemblage was never put into use. But Ortego and his sponsor, the cartel, through the asbestos cement review, turned to the growing market of materials for self-help housing in the majority world. Some were developed later for the ECOL scheme. But first, the roof sheeting was put through the rigors of prototyping, refined in a pilot scheme, and subjected to stress testing, where it passed, but it was deemed unfit for use in tropical storms. By this stage, the reach of the material cartel was global. Boastful of the attenuated success of asbestos cement as a building material, by 1966, the Swiss marketing manager of the South African company envisaged it as a thin band, 7 millimeters thick, that would stretch over 2,000 kilometers. Soon after, Canalit was added to the range of roofing for black housing, both in the segregated locations and in self-help schemes. The caveat about tropical storms was buried in the catalogues. The consequence of this elision would be the scattering of fragments of material across the landscapes of black townships, joining fibers from asbestos cement pipes in the water system and mingling with PFASs from waste plastics dissolved in acid drainage from mines. The exposure of black bodies to risky thin materials had become dispersed, uncontainable, and irreparable. But rather than leaving our material focus and pointing to misinformation, regulatory arbitrage, or poor governance as the setting for this toxic layer, I ask for reflexive work within architecture histories of its practice. We need to firmly place the taste for thin materials in the Bauhaus as the enduring legacy of its agenda to conjoin material conditions and aesthetic value, and the perpetuation of this taste in the lineage of its diaspora. If, as a consequence, an advertisement for asbestos cement conduits is nearly indistinguishable from an artwork by Joseph Alberts, then how can we undo the interchangeability of thin and risky materials and delicate and elegant lines? For one, we need to take more care in reading these drawings through which trade secrets of architects are transmitted. The isometrics and the sections in the AC review shared ways of inserting the material to address genuine concerns, fire, weathering, reactivity, costs, and weight. But they also communicate aesthetic choices, guided by artistic experiments in which the near weightlessness of thin materials allowed for a freed spatial imagination. But the imagined and the material are artificial divisions in architecture. As the brief for this discussion notes, decentering the building as object leads us to the ethically necessary understanding of its material histories, externalities, and afterlives. But it is qualities of the building's object form, its lightness, its abstracted spatiality, and its replicability that replicates its risks the risks in its materiality. In asbestos cement, as in plastics, laminates, glues, adhesives, composite boards, and thousands more, being spread thinly, widely disseminates risks. And so, expanding on the tension suggested in the conference statements between lightness and the heavy topic of deadly materials, I suggest we return within the Bauhaus to the drawing as a site to re-annotate these histories and to fill in their missing bodies. Thanks.